Friday Q&A, a webinar series produced by the UF Thomson Earth Systems Institute's Scientist in Every Florida School program and the Community Scholars Initiative. Each Friday at 3 p.m. for 30 minutes, a scientist will present on their area of expertise, followed by a question and answer session. The Scientist in Every Florida School program is a free program housed within the Thomson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The CEFS program connects and builds long-term partnerships between teachers and scientists in order to bring current scientific research and big data into the classrooms in Florida and beyond. The Community Scholars Initiative is based at Valencia College in Orlando, Florida. Our goal is to connect, create, and elevate educational experiences in the classroom and our community. Supported by the Lake Nona community, we facilitate programs in both Orange and Osceola County schools, work with community leaders and businesses to build out-of-school learning programs. During the COVID-19 school closures, we are happy to partner with CEFS to continue engaging with our students, teachers, and parents in a digital platform. Today, we are joined by Laura VonMutius in the Center for Education at the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey. She is the manager of education there and joined in February of 2017 and hasn't looked back. Laura grew up in Orlando and has a BS from Florida State University in art education, and she continues to create art in her free time. Laura started her career as an educator at SeaWorld and then the Central Florida Zoo, where she was a conservation educator and resident artist. Through her years of being an educator, Laura has inspired children and adults alike to take part in conserving wildlife through her enthusiastic leadership at summer camps, programs for public, private, and homeschool students, and special events. She's an active member of LEEF, the League of Environmental Educators in Florida. And as Laura tells you about her work, please add your questions into the chat and one of our moderators will ask your questions of her. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Laura. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And I will jump into that, what is a bird of prey, in just a second. But really quickly, I'm at the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey, which is a facility in Maitland, Florida. We are open to the public, typically, not currently because of COVID-19, but we are typically open to the public. So maybe some of you, if you're watching locally, you've been to visit our center before. So a little bit about our center is that we are a bird of prey rehab facility. So let me jump into what a bird of prey is, just so we're all on the same page with that first. So a bird of prey, if you want to click the next one there, Brian. Bird of prey is a bird that is a carnivore, so they're only eating meat. They're catching their food with their talons, and they have a sharp or hooked beak that they're using to tear into the meat that they're eating. Now, catching their food with their talons is the really important part. There's other carnivorous birds in the world, like a pelican or a penguin, for example, but both of those birds and other birds, they're going to use their beak to catch those the food, the meat that they're eating. But using your talon is one of those things that makes a bird of prey, specifically a bird of prey. And a synonym for bird of prey is raptor. So you'll hear me use those interchangeably and others as well, just so you know as we continue on. Next slide. So there is 7 main types of birds of prey. And if you want to click through these, Brian, there's owls, eagles, hawks, vultures, kites, falcons, and osprey. And we have all those 7 types here in Central Florida and at our center. And of course, across the world, there is, many different species of each of these particular types and different from, of course, what we would have here. And again, these are the only types of birds that we deal with at our rehab facility here. Next slide. So again, we focus on rehabilitation, wildlife rehab of only birds of prey. So what that means is when a bird of prey in the wild gets injured and they need help, or maybe they just fell ill and they're not necessarily injured, then they can come to our facility where we will help them. And of course, the birds don't know to just like fly to our center. So it's usually people like the general public that finds an injured hawk or an injured eagle, and they can call us and we will walk you through picking up that bird and bringing it to us, sort of being the ambulance for that bird to our bird hospital. And then of course, our goal is to work through the 3 R's and get that bird back where it belongs. So next slide. So of course, the first step of getting those birds healthy is recovery. So we have a Raptor trauma clinic where we get the birds as healthy as we can again, of course. So you can see in these photos, one of the owls is being fed. We are working on cleaning a wound in that bald eagle in the other photo. And birds of prey get injured from a bunch of different things. Sometimes it's natural causes like babies falling out of the nest or a natural predator attacked the bird. And a lot of times though, however, it is a lot of things that humans have done. So we see a lot of car collisions. We see some gunshot wounds or entanglement in trash like fishing line, and electrocution we get fairly often as well. So no matter what injured the bird, we are there to help it. Next slide. After the bird ideally has recovered in the Raptor Trauma Clinic, the next R is rehab. So it's sort of like physical therapy for us after we've had an injury. The birds need it as well. So what you're seeing is a photo of our 100-foot flight barn. So that gives space for our big birds, like a bald eagle, for example, to do a full loop of flying. So that way they can build up their stamina and their muscles and get the exercise that they need before the last R, which is the next slide, is release. And that's always our goal, to get the birds back out into the wild where they belong. Raptors are apex predators. They're at the very tippy top of most of our food chains. So it's important for them to be out in the environment, keeping all of the lower things of the food chain in check. They're also great indicators of our environment. You can see the health of a body of water, for example, by the number of bald eagles and osprey that are nearby. So we want to put them back into the wild, and that is always, again, sort of our end goal. And then there is one more R that we do here at our center, and that's the next slide. And that is research. So again, we are very science-based here. And once those birds do go back out to the wild, we can study them and sort of track them. So you can see in this photo, there is bald eagle talons that have those metal bracelets around the ankle. And we are able to sort of track them that way, give each bird an individual bracelet, individual number on those bracelets. And then as those birds are spotted, people with binoculars can actually read some of these numbers and then sort of track where those birds are going. And that's just one of the research studies that we are a part of with the birds that come through our clinic. And of course, there's so much more. And we are constantly starting new studies and participating in others as well. Now, the thing with all of that is sometimes the birds are not releasable. So when we get, of course, a bird, our goal is to put it back to the wild, but sometimes their injuries prevent them from ever being returned to where they belong, back to their homes. So when that happens, then they're deemed non-releasable. They can't go back to the wild, and we find them a permanent home. Some of them stay right here with us at our facility, and some of them go to other facilities all across the country. We've sent birds before. So I do have two friends to show you guys today. And the first one is an owl. It will take me like 30 seconds, if that, to grab him really quick. So look at this adorable picture of the baby owl here, and I'll be right back. All right. So the picture of the owl that was on the screen is actually a baby barred owl, and this is an adult barred owl. So his name is Merlin, and Merlin is one of our oldest residents. He is 34 years old. Now, barred owls are the most common of the owls that you are likely to see and hear here in Central Florida, is where we are. So they do really well in a bunch of different habitats, including urban settings, so our neighborhoods. And they have a very distinctive call. It is 4 hoots in a row. Who cooks for you? Is what it sounds like they're asking, a hoo, 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 hoo. And we'll see, he's quite enthralled by looking at himself in the screen, but sometimes he will be quite talkative. So we'll see if he'll talk to us as I continue talking about him. So Merlin was rescued 34 years ago, and you might be able to see one of his injuries, and he only has one eye. And that is because of a bit of a sad story. He was actually found as a baby by a human family who decided to keep him as a pet. And because of that, he never learned from his owl parents how to be an owl. So we call that being a human imprint. He imprinted on the human family and does not know how to be an owl. He wouldn't know how to hunt in the wild or how to find a mate and make a nest and do any of the things he should to survive. And when that happens, we cannot, unfortunately, change that in his head. We can't teach him that he is an owl, and they have to be under human care the rest of their life when that happens as a human imprint. However, you'll notice, again, he has that one eye. So when he was, eventually the family brought him to our facility and didn't tell us how long they had kept this baby owl, staff looked him over and saw that he's a healthy baby owl. They put him in the flight barn with other owls so he could be rehabilitated and released to the wild. And the other owls attacked him. And that's how he lost that eye, because when they are an imprint, they socially act different enough the other owls can tell and don't enjoy that. So they do attack them because of that. So that is Merlin. And again, they are the most common in our area. And they get their name a barred owl because, ooh, well, he's kind of hunched over. They've got stripes or bars here on their coloration along their chest. And so that's how they got their name a barred owl. And of course, owls have a lot of really cool adaptations to allow them to survive. And one that you guys probably know of, or you've seen in cartoons, how owls turn their head all the way around in a circle. They cannot actually do that, but they can go quite far, about 270 degrees around. And they're able to do that because they have extra bones in their neck. So humans have 7 vertebrae that make up our neck. Owls have 14 bones. And because of that, they are able to have a lot more flexibility and be able to turn their head a lot farther than us. Now, the reason they sort of have to do that is the way, ooh, he's even kind of showing you, the way that their eyeballs are. They don't have circle eye sockets and circle eyeballs like us. They're actually tube shaped, like a pair of binoculars. And so to actually look over his shoulder, he can't rotate his eye. He actually just has to turn and look over his shoulder to be able to see what is there. Now, of course, they are hunting at nighttime, and this particular species is what we call crepuscular. So they're not purely nocturnal. They are instead hunting during dusk and dawn. So again, that's why they're going to be a common one for us to see here in Central Florida. They're kind of out and about when we are. Now, they have silent flight because of their feathers. They have little fringes at the end of their flight feathers, and they're very soft feathers. So because of that, they can flap their wings and not make any noise, which of course, hunting in dim light and flying silently allows them to sneak up on the prey that they are hunting, which is pretty awesome. And of course, owls tend to be a fan favorite. But I have one more bird to show you really quickly. So again, 20 seconds or so just to pop him back and grab our next bird. I will be right back. I don't know how loud my microphone is, but you may have just heard him. He was hooting at me as I was putting him away. So our next little friend is here on my desk. And this is Susie. Susie is an American kestrel. Let's see if we'll turn her around. And American kestrels are the smallest of the falcon family. So we'll see, I won't get too close, but you can see she's only about the size of my hand. So she is quite small, and falcons are amazing. So American kestrels, like Susie, are found here in Central Florida year round. They're the only falcon that we do have all year round. The other species we get, like peregrine falcons and Merlin falcons, only migrate through our area. But American kestrels are here, and falcons, they specialize in hunting other birds. So they're made to eat birds. And one of the things they have, let's see if we can show you close enough, is she has really long toes. So if you can see down here on her perch, how long her toes are, long and skinny. That's made for fitting in between the feathers of a bird to grab onto the actual body of the bird so she can make sure she has her dinner. That's very important. Some other cool falcon features are those black lines down her face. Other falcons have them as well, like a peregrine falcon, if you imagine them. And those black lines work to absorb the sunlight so that they can easily see their prey. Falcons hunt from above, diving down for their prey. And just like sports stars, like soccer players or football players that put the black line to help absorb the light, it helps them be able to see easier when it's really bright light outside. And these guys have that naturally, where the sports players, of course, have to put it on their faces, which is pretty cool. Now, Susie herself was injured. She had an injury, a fracture into her wing that did not, unfortunately, heal well enough for her to go out to the wild. And all falcons, they have this ability to hover when they're hunting for their food, which requires some really specialized wing movement. And without a full, complete working wing, she unfortunately would not be able to fend for herself. So Susie is 2 years old, has been with us since she was a young first-year bird. We don't know exactly how old she was, but they actually have a slightly different coloration their first year of life. So we do know that she was under 1 year old when she was rescued. Now, an interesting thing about them is that they're one of the only birds of prey that you can tell a male and a female apart just by their coloration. If you imagine a bald eagle with that white head and white tail, brown body, doesn't matter whether there's a boy or girl, you can't really tell. They both have that same coloration. But as Susie is turned around, you can see her back is brown with black stripes. And if she was a boy, she would actually have grayish colored wings along her back, and her front would be solid instead of these speckles that she has. So that's kind of cool that they are sexually dimorphic, which means that you can tell them apart by their color. All right, I see that there's a bunch of questions, and I know I wanted to make sure I have time to answer them. So Susie's gonna hang out here with me, and we'll see if there's any questions you guys have for me to answer.
Yeah, Laura, thank you so much. So we're going to start with Rafa, who asks, how can you tell how old an owl is? And how do you tell whether it's male or female, which I know you addressed a little bit.
Yeah, so we only know how old Merlin and the other birds that live here at the center are when they were rescued as a baby. Unfortunately, they're not like a mammal where that you can tell by their teeth and sort of age them that way. Once they're an adult, you can't tell how old a bird is. So we only know because he was rescued as a baby, we've counted the next 34 years. That's the only way we know. And of course, like I mentioned, most birds of prey, you cannot tell a male and a female apart by their coloration. We actually have to get a DNA test. So we will send off a feather sample or a blood sample of the bird and get that to find out whether it's a boy or a girl. We really only do that if the bird is going to stay with us permanently. If they're just a patient, we don't care whether it's a boy or girl. They're going back to the wild either way.
Lily asks, are there any diseases that affect owls?
Yeah, there is a lot, and not any that I can think of off the top of my head that specifically only affect owls, but birds of prey in general do have some diseases. Some that we see a lot, one for example is arboviruses, and they're actually passed by mosquitoes. So they're similar sort of to our malaria. Birds can get that as well, and that's a disease that we get quite a bit into our clinic, especially because we have so much water here in Florida. So we have lots of mosquitoes and birds that live in those wetland and water settings. So that does happen, but they also have bird versions of sort of pneumonia and bird versions of sort of colds and stuff that they will get as well, just natural illnesses that they will pick up in the wild.
James is curious, how long do owls live for?
Great question. It sort of depends on the species. So the barred owl I showed you before in the wild would live to be about 15, maybe 20 years old. And again, Merlin was 34. They can live a lot longer under human care because we are here to give them good food and give them medical care when they need it. And of course, no predators here when they live with us. Now, smaller species of owls, like our little screech owls that are again about 5-6 inches like Susie, they're gonna live less, about 8 to 10 years or so in the wild. And the larger owls like the great horns are gonna live a lot longer because they are bigger.
Edwin is wondering, is there a difference between the types of raptors seen in Central Florida versus the rest of Florida?
So there's not too much difference from Central Florida around the rest of the state, but there are some unique ones. So one that's really cool would be the burrowing owl. We don't get them very much here in Central Florida, but if you head farther south to the Everglades, it is a type of owl that lives underground. If you've seen the movie or read the book Hoot, it is about that species. And that's kind of just, they're a weird owl that most birds do not live underground like that. That's kind of a unique species that South Florida has. And then as well as the snail kite. It is our endangered species here in the state. And again, they live closer to the Everglades where there is an abundance of snails for them to eat. If you head up to North Florida, they have a couple that pass through the panhandle as they're migrating that we don't get necessarily here in Central Florida. But again, in general, we have the same birds.
Selena asks, how much do owls weigh?
Depends on the species again. So again, I showed you a barred owl. Merlin, despite his size, right, he sat about a foot or so, he only weighs about 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds. They're not very hefty birds at all. Birds in general have to be very lightweight to be able to fly. They have hollow bones and their feathers, of course, cover their body, don't weigh very much. So they are quite lightweight. Even a bald eagle, if you imagine a big bald eagle, they only weigh about 8 pounds. So they're not heavy at all.
Nikita is curious, are owls scared of anything?
Yes. Owls are scared of predators. So a lot of our smaller species of owls, like our screech owl, for example, would have a lot of big predators because the screech owls are so little. The barred owl, like I showed you, their biggest predator is actually another type of owl called a great horned owl. So they are scared of them, especially if they're young, or if they're injured, then they could have issues with raccoons or opossums as well, even snakes perhaps getting into their nests. But again, humans is going to be the big thing that we're going to be injuring them. And luckily, naturally, they should have a healthy fear of humans and stay away from us.
Maria asks, how many species of owls are there in the world?
Great question. We might have to look this up to be for sure. I'm pretty sure it's in the 30s that we have. And owls are everywhere. There's tons of different species. And an interesting fact is we have barn owls, which are here in Central Florida and across the US, and they're actually found all around the world, which is kind of unique. A lot of the other species are specific to sort of their area or their region of the world.
Sebastian asks, what is the biggest bird that you have at your Audubon Society Center?
The biggest we have is actually the biggest that is in Florida, as far as birds of prey go, is the bald eagle. So we have a female bald eagle. Oh, I should have mentioned that. Actually, for raptors, the females weigh more. They are bigger because they have to lay the eggs. So the female body is just bigger for them to be able to do that. So our biggest particular bird, her name is Paige, and she is a female bald eagle. She weighs about 10.5 pounds.
Joshua is wondering, are bald eagles found in Punta Gorda, Florida?
Yes. Bald eagles are definitely found everywhere across Florida. We have the second highest population of bald eagles in the whole United States after Alaska. And it's because bald eagles eat fish and need to be near water. And Florida is covered in lakes and rivers and bodies of water. So they are everywhere you are in Florida.
Emma asks, how long have you been studying birds?
Good question. So I started my career at SeaWorld, and very different animals than I do now. And then at the Central Florida Zoo. And then I've been here with Audubon about coming up on 3.5 years. So I just started specifically doing birds when I started here, but I've always been an animal lover. And of course, birds are animals, and what's not to love when you can see these guys and work with them.
Stephanie asks, how do owls help farmers in their fields?
Great question. Owls are the best pest control that there is. A single barn owl can eat 1,000 mice in a year. So no matter how many chemicals the farmer would put on their crops, it's not enough that a barn owl could, a barn owl would easily beat them. So they make great pest control, and by eating all of the mice and rats, then the mice and rats cannot eat the crops. So it's a really handy thing to have owls, attract owls to your yard, even to get rid of the mice and snakes and things you might not want in there, as well as farmers utilizing them as pest control.
Edwin is wondering, how many birds of prey do you guys get in per month?
Ooh, per month is an interesting one because it depends on the time of year. Springtime right now is actually our busiest time, but in total in the year, we get about 700 patients. So May alone, we usually get about 200 because again, it's the most busiest time. And it's only busy in springtime because it's baby season. So we get a lot of babies that are falling out of their nests or being pushed out of their nest, and adults that are fighting with other adults in order to protect their nests. So we get a lot more patients this time of year.
Selena wants to know, what can we do to help birds of prey?
Oh, great question. And there's so much. So really simple things that even young kids can do is picking up trash and litter. I mentioned that they sometimes can get tangled up in that, or we get vultures, for example, that will try to eat shiny things. So picking up litter and putting in a trash can or recycling is one of the easiest. And then other things as well. So we encourage trimming your trees in fall. If you trim in springtime, then you're cutting down branches that could be already used as a nest or potentially nesting sites for birds, as well as making sure we're keeping track of our water use. So many birds here in Florida, like the eagles and the ospreys, even the barred owls, live near bodies of water. So making sure we're keeping all of our bodies of water clean helps the birds in the long run as well.
Ashley is wondering, what is the most colorful raptor in the world?
Oh, in the world? Wow. So there might be others, but one of the ones I'm thinking of that comes to mind immediately is the king vulture. You guys will have to look up, Google search or whatever, look up in a book, the king vulture. Their body is kind of boring. It's just black and white, but their head is covered with all sorts of orange and yellow and blue and green and red, all sorts of colors. And they're absolutely beautiful birds.
Layla wants to know, how do owls mate with each other?
Great question. And owls, like our birds of prey, they actually do mate for life. So once they have a mate, that's the one that they will use year after year and raise their young together. We call that being monogamous. And they would find their nesting territory and sort of claim that as their own, and then work together to build their nest and raise their young. The females do lay the eggs and sit on the eggs the most. The males will actually bring them food typically, and in order to sort of help care for those babies.
Josh asks, how long are owls pregnant, or specifically barren owls?
Yeah, so the barred owls, it's about 30 days for everything. So they lay their eggs. It takes about 30 days for their eggs to hatch. So they have to incubate them and keep them warm. And then from hatching, it takes about 30 days for the babies to fly, or we call that being fledged, and leave the nest. So we're looking at about 60 days in total from laying the eggs till the babies leave.
Edwin wants to know, is it true there's a relationship between birds and dinosaurs, and how do we know?
Yes, there is a lot of evidence that they're finding fossils. Scientists and paleontologists that study fossils are finding that dinosaurs had feathers. There is a specific dinosaur called Archaeopteryx. That's sort of the first link. And Merlin's talking, he liked that. That is one of the first dinosaurs known to have feathers and be able to fly. So there is lots of data that's showing that today's birds are essentially descended from dinosaurs.
Jose asks, do we have any bird fossils here in Florida?
Ooh, great question. And yes, probably not what you're thinking, but really anything left behind showing previous life is a fossil. So if you find a talon or a bone or a beak or something from a bird that has died, that's technically a fossil. And I'm sure that there is definitely other more dinosaur-like old time fossils of birds here in Florida as well.
Grace says, I know that a California condor is a bird of prey, but how is it a bird of prey when it is a scavenger?
Yes, the conundrum. And scientists have big debate on vultures and whether they are raptors and birds of prey or not. And they're finding some studies that are, if you look at sort of the genetic makeup and the body makeup of vultures and condors, that they're probably more closely related to storks. However, they do still have curved talons and a curved beak, which sort of put them with the more raptor side of things. So here at the center, we try not to get involved in that debate. We just say that no one else in the area is helping rehabilitate vultures. So we say, yes, they're a bird of prey and we will help them here at our center.
Well, I think this has been one of the most exciting Friday Q&A so far because we've had some special guests, including Laura, with us today. I want to thank everyone for joining us, especially Laura VonMutius from the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey, and for her connecting with us today. Once again, our Friday Q&As with the scientists take place weekly at 3 p.m. as part of a collaboration between scientists in every Florida school and the Community Scholars Initiative. You can look for more about our guest, as well as our programs by visiting the websites you see on your screen. You can also find a recording of today's video on our YouTube channel, that's UF Earth Systems YouTube channel, along with resources for birds of prey. Please be sure to register for next Friday's Q&A. We'll be bringing you a rocks specialist, geology, and we ask that you bring your rocks and minerals with you to that call. Thanks again, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.